Welcome everybody to my Lightroom tutorial. Today it's just going to be a very small introduction to Lightroom, what all the sliders and buttons and stuff, what all that stuff does. Minus like one or two things which I don't even know what they do, but everything else we're going to have in the tutorial. Alright, let's get started. So we open Lightroom. And this is the home screen that you'll see in Lightroom. So let's tap on a photo that I've already added. But you know what? Before doing that, I'll show you how to add it. So you tap this little photo with a plus symbol icon in the bottom right, or on the bottom right, and you can add a photo. Now there's from all photos, there's from camera roll, there's from files, and there's from camera device. From all photos and from camera device are grayed out. From all photos is grayed out because I think that adds from your Lightroom library. I don't know how that would work, but yeah, so that's grayed out. From camera roll is from your camera roll, and from files is from your files. It's that simple. Gosh, that sounds so passive-aggressive. I promise I didn't mean it that way. And from camera device is from just, if you have like a camera or an SD card or something like that plugged in, that will light up and become available. So yeah. I'm just going to tap from camera roll. And as you can see, I have a bunch of stuff in here. And where is this photo of the dog? There it is. See how it says LR? That means I already imported it. But all that I'd have to do is just tap it and it would import. So, I mean, if I tap it, I think it'll open the file anyway. So let me tap it. Here it is. It opened. And if I hadn't, already imported it in here, there'd be a blue check mark on the top right that would basically, if you click that, then the photo actually saves. Otherwise it doesn't, save. Like if you click the back arrow on the left, it'll just go back to the import screen. And if you had edited a bunch of stuff, it wouldn't save any of it. So I'd recommend clicking the blue check mark, and what that will basically do is it'll take you back to the screen like this, and a little thing will pop up in the front saying imported to all photos or something like that. And, wait a few more seconds just to make sure it saves, and then you can open it again. Just tap to open it again. And what Lightroom will do is, and if it's doing it slowly, you'll see this especially, like that. It'll say loading preview, and then loading smart preview, and then it'll say loading original. And that's because it's loading the image, right? You gotta wait for it to say original, like it says now. That means it's fully loaded, and even then I would wait like a few more seconds, like maybe 10 or so more seconds, just to make sure it's completely loaded in. Okay, so with that said, let's tap the button in the top left. Oh, and by the way, it says all that in the top left, where it says like 1 out of 108 original and all that stuff. So yeah. Okay, so now let's go through things one by one. So the first thing I'm going to tap is optics. I always like doing that first. Remove CA is basically something that will remove like weird color artifacting. If you want to know what artifacting is, just look up define artifacting in photography. And if you specifically want to know what this thing does, search define remove chromatic aberration in photography, and you should get your answers. And let's also enable lens corrections. What that does is it basically corrects for, like let's say you're using a wide angle lens and, it warps the image a little bit. Enable lens corrections will fix stuff like that by, perspective warping the image to fix that. Okay, now let's close out of optics. And now let's go from the top. Oh, and I completely forgot to mention, I have my UI flipped for left-handed users, so this whole editing bar would be on the right if you had it set to that. So, exposure is basically, the overall brightness of your image. So if I push that forward, the image gets brighter. If I push it backward, the image gets darker. So I'm going to leave it right there. That seems good. And now let's do contrast. Contrast, I think, is like the difference between the light colors and the dark colors in your image. I don't really know. Sorry about that. I'll just show you what it does. So if you slide it up, notice how the image gets more contrasty. And if you slide it down, the image gets flatter. See that? So I'm gonna put this right here. That seems good. And okay, so now we're moving on to highlights. Highlights are basically the really bright parts of your image. For example, look at this dog's white fur on its belly. You know, if I raise the highlights, they get brighter and more washed out. And if I lower the highlights, they, you know, look at that, they get more clear and you get more detail. So I'm gonna leave the highlights, let's leave them at -100 for now, which is all the way down. And next we have shadows. Now, you know, shadows are just the shadows. One thing about shadows though, if you push the slider forward, you actually lift the shadows, meaning you make the shadowy parts brighter. And if you lower the shadows, you make the shadowy parts darker. So I'm gonna leave this right there. That seems good. And the whites are basically, you know, just the whites of your image and how bright or dark they are. And so if I lift the whites, you know, then notice how the whites get whiter, I guess. And if I lower them, they get darker. So not whiter, brighter, and then darker if I go the other way. So I'm gonna leave them right there, seems good. And now the blacks are the same thing, except if you slide it forward, the black areas get less black and more flat, and if you lower the blacks, they get more black. So I'm gonna leave that right there. Actually, let's lift it up a bit. Right there. And I've now closed out of light, and we're gonna go into color. So we tap that open, and white balance, if you want an explanation, please go look it up. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm actually gonna just pick custom in here, and I'm actually gonna try the color picker as well. So the color picker will help you balance the whites out for a certain area in your image. Now, the UI is not the best because now the check mark is gone. But I can also just try this dog's white fur as the area I choose. So there's that, and then I click the check mark to confirm. And notice how it changed the settings for me, I think. So, yeah, or did it? I actually don't know. Let me hit undo. It did, okay. You can tell I've rarely ever used the color picker before. But anyway, so now that I have a starting point, we can mess with the settings. So temperature is basically the warmth or the coolness of your image. If you push the slider more towards the blue side, and you know, the blue and purple side, I guess, you get more blue. If you push it towards the yellow side, you get yellow. You get more yellow, right? So I'm gonna leave this right there. That seems alright. And the tint, I don't really know how to explain it, but I can just show you what it does. So if you push it more towards the purple side, this happens. If you push it more towards the green side, this happens. So, and a lot of times I don't really do much with tint. If anything, I guess I'll just leave it there. I think it might have been there by default, actually, for this image. And the vibrance is how strong or not strong the muted colors are in the image. So, you know, if we push it up, notice how those muted colors start coming out. If we push it down, those muted colors start going away, and eventually you actually start taking all the colors away. So I'm gonna leave this right there. That seems alright. Okay, and the saturation is the overall intensity of all the colors. You know, vibrance is basically saturation for the muted colors, and saturation is the same thing for all the colors in the image. So I'm gonna put that right here. That seems good. And color mix is the hue, so you know where in the range of that color is, and saturation, which I already explained, and luminance, which is basically how bright that color is in the image for each color. You know, because you can go through them all. I'll exemplify with this dog's red color here. I want to make it more red than what it is. So I'm going to increase the slider more towards the red side. That seems good. And I'm going to increase the saturation. That seems good. And I'm going to decrease the luminance. See how it gets less bright? And if I raise it, it gets more bright. I'm actually going to raise the luminance a bit. That seems good. And color grading, well, let's go into it. Color grading is basically luminance, I already explained. Blending, I don't really know how to explain it. And balance, I also don't know how to explain it. I don't use this tab that often, but I can try to explain it. The shadows, if you move this wheel around, you'll change the hue of the shadows. If you double tap it, it resets to where it was by default. And that's the same with any slider, actually. You double tap it, it goes back to where it was by default. And basically, this is the same for all of these things. Global is all the colors and all the things, Highlights is just the highlights. Midtones is the midtones, which is like the middle of the brightness spectrum, I think. And the shadows is the shadows, And the blending and balance, notice how they're underneath that black line. They're global. This section, I'm probably, if I explain it, I'm probably going to explain it in a different video because I need to do more research on it to explain it. And so we're just going to close out of that and go out of color and into effects. And texture is, how rough your image is, I guess. So we can zoom into this dog's fur, like right about there. And if I increase the texture, notice the difference? Let's increase it a lot. See that? So I'm basically I'm going to leave the texture right there. Maybe a little more. And the clarity is how clear your image looks. It's at 8 by default in this image. And I noticed that, sliders will do that. They'll be at some numbers by default sometimes, especially with RAW files. And that's a whole other video, RAW, So, okay, so let's increase clarity. If we increase it a lot, notice the difference? If we decrease it a lot, notice the difference? So I'm just I'm gonna put it right there. That seems good. All right, dehaze. Well, it just takes this like haze that can be in some photos away. I tend to play with it for every photo though. Like, look, if I increase it, see the difference? The photo, it's like clarity, except it's further removing that haze. Whoa, the image pops a lot more now. Okay, so vignette is this like circular thing that appears around the image when you mess with the slider. So if you go toward the left, to the left, it will be the black version, and if you go to the right, it will be the white version. So I'm going to use the black version for this image, and that seems good, but let's mess with the rest of the settings first, and then we'll see if it's good as well. The roundness is how round the vignette is. See it moving? I'm going to use the black version, and I'm going to put it right there. And these settings below it, midpoint, roughness, feather, and highlights, are all for the vignette, I think. And these settings below vignette, not all of them, but midpoint, roundness, feather, and highlights specifically, are all settings under vignette. Notice how when I reset vignette by double tapping it, all those settings get grayed out. So I'm going to undo that. Midpoint, I don't really know how to explain. Again, sorry. But it does this. Feather is how hard the line is, see? So I'm gonna leave it right there. Highlights, I don't know, let's try it. I don't use the slider ever, but let's try it. Yeah, it's not doing anything, or at least not, I can't see it, so I'm gonna leave it. Grain, I never use, but, let's try it. I know what it does, though. It's like film grain, like grain. So if we zoom in to this part, I guess, we can add grain. And as you can see, it's now bumpy. There's a bunch of spots everywhere. Let's add a lot of grain. And let's increase the size of the individual grains. This is basically emulating film grain, I think. As you can see, it has a pretty significant impact. let's lower the size of those grains. And let's increase the roughness of each individual grain. And as you can see, it kind of has like a film grain effect, especially over here next to this person's leg. If I reset the grain, see how it gets a lot smoother? That's pretty cool. And I actually don't want any grain in this image, so that's where I'm going to leave that. Okay, so now let's tap on the split toning thing inside of the effects tab. Oh. Oh, so it's basically the same as the color grading thing I showed earlier. Okay. Okay, so that means we are done with effects, and let's go now into detail. And we have sharpening as the first slider. So basically, this is like artificially increasing the detail in your image, I think. Like, let's go to this jacket, I guess. Sure. And let's increase the sharpening. See how it gets really noisy? But it's also sharpening the image. Because if we zoom back out, I think actually it'll show best if we zoom out. So if I increase the sharpening a lot, see how it looks like the image has more detail in it? And it's like, sharper, it's, clearer and stuff. This is all artificial, so I would use sharpening as little as necessary. And I, again, don't know how to properly explain sharpening. I'll have to look more into it, and maybe I'll have a second video of all the things I didn't know how to explain in my first Lightroom tutorial in a second video. So let me increase it a little bit, maybe 70. The radius, I don't really know how to explain. You may have noticed the image I'm editing in the tutorial suddenly looks a lot different. You are not seeing things. The jump happened because the first part of the original screen recording did not save. Therefore, I had to do a retake. I decided the most natural way to do that would be to completely re-edit the image. Before resetting the image, I did make a preset with all the original settings, as well as another one with just the settings I would not be touching in the retake. At the end of the video, I will show the image with all the original edits, as well as the second version of the image with all the edits from the retake, and the edits from the part of the original take I did not lose, combined. Now, back to the tutorial. I don't usually mess with it anyway, so I'm just going to leave that. And the detail is just, I don't know how much the detail in the image is brought out, I guess. I mean, I can try it just to see what happens here. That actually looks good. So yeah, so I guess detail brings out the detail, like, yeah. Okay, and the masking, I don't know what that does. Noise reduction is just if there's any noise in the image, you can bring it down a bit. I'm actually not going to touch that. I mean, I can show it, but I'm not going to really do much with it. Let's zoom into a bit of a noisy part of the image. So see how grainy or slash noisy that is? If I increase the noise reduction a lot, it gets a lot smoother. But noise reduction also removes a lot of detail, so, and in this case, it doesn't really matter that much, so I'm just going to leave noise reduction at 10, which is where it was by default. Detail, I don't know what that does. In contrast, in this case, I also don't know what that does. I mean, I guess it would help, I don't know. Color noise reduction is like if, let's say, you have a lot of like green, blue, and purple areas that shouldn't really be there, like, little pixely green, blue areas. That helps remove that. This image doesn't really have a lot of that. I mean, I can show it though. Like right here, see how it's like doing stuff with the purple and yellow? If I use color noise reduction, it will probably remove it. Yeah, see how it's gone now? But color noise reduction also makes the image look a little weird and smooth in a way. It's like this uncanny valley kind of effect. So I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to leave it where it was, which I think is 0 or 25, it seems. If you double tap any slider, it will reset it to where it was by default. I can't believe I didn't mention that until now. And I don't really mess with the other part of color noise reduction either, like the detail and smoothness. So I'm just going to leave all of that alone, and geometry, I barely touch this as well, but this just helps with, different, perspective correction and all that. You guys can play with this, and it'll show you exactly what it does. Presets is a thing where you can, make user presets in the user presets part right here by basically you tap this dot 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 in the top right, and you can click create preset, and you pick what you want to have in the preset out of your settings, and you name it, and it'll save it in user presets or wherever you want to save it. I think I saw an option to change the folder, but either way, you'll find it here, and any other preset folders you make will probably be underneath user presets. I've actually never done that before though. But anyway, here's the free ones, and here's the premium presets. Now we can move on to crop and rotate. Again, this is like similar to geometry, except it's like a simpler menu, I think. I don't know. I use this sometimes, but in this case, this image doesn't need it at all, and the controls are pretty straightforward, so I'm just gonna skip it. Healing brush, this is a whole video in itself. I'll probably go in depth in this if I decide to make more videos on this. Well, not a whole video, but like healing brush and selective edits require a while to explain, and this video is already way too long, so I will explain these in a future video. I don't know what that button below it does, but the last one is just versions of your image, right? You can select versions and stuff. Down here, you have the option to star your image, and, you can swipe through them and flag up and down. I think you can swipe up to, I don't know. I rarely use this menu. You guys can play with it. And besides, the first time you open it, Lightroom will probably give you a tutorial anyway. And this is the comments thing. And just read the text there. This is, you can add keywords to this image. I think that like maybe once you export it, it'll help you search for it, maybe in your photos library or something. This is all the information data about the image. As you can see, it's a DNG file, and the date was shot on, the camera setup it was shot on, and some other details about it as well. And the three dots here, you have organize. Let's tap on that. You can add to the different albums you have. You have view options where it can show what data it shows on the screen, such as show hide info. You can turn that off and notice how the thing in the top left disappeared. Turn it on, and you can pick between these two, basically. Show hide histogram, which is a whole other thing I can explain, and show hide info. And the film strip at the bottom is just, your photos. You can toggle that on and off just by the little film strip button. So you tap this, and you also have slideshow, which I think will slide through your photos like a slideshow. I don't really want to do that right now. And settings, I highly recommend you guys look through these and explore them for yourself. I mean, they're pretty self-explanatory. One thing I will talk about actually is cloud storage and sync. Only download smart previews is on by default, I think. And so make sure to turn that off. And prevent from sleep is also off by default, I think. So make sure to turn that on, because that will prevent your device from going to sleep while you're editing. And local storage, basically you can clear cache, which is, the locally stored copies and stuff of all your iCloud stuff. I mean, I can just tap it right now. You'll probably see my storage up at the top go up. Yeah, all the little light blue went away and it all turned to dark blue. That means that there's no more light blue and all the photos are now completely online only, like on my account, basically. And those are really the only two things I'll talk about. I mean, we can tap import as well. Yeah, this stuff is there. And you can add a copyright. Let me turn that on, actually. I don't know why that's not on. There we go. Copyright Parth Gupta, right? I actually had to add the copyright symbol in there. Anyway, you guys can explore these settings. And the rest of it's pretty self-explanatory. And the help button over here, you can look through all the help stuff. Yeah. And last but not least, I think this is the last thing I have to explain in the editing tab, and that is the export menu, which you tap that little button at the top right to get to. And you have I don't really use any of this stuff. The only button I really use here is export as at the very bottom, and I choose TIFF. Usually dimensions, the largest available dimensions, bit depth, 16 bits. This will get you the most detail in your image. These are all settings that will get you the most detail in your image. Compression, none. You'll have a larger file, but at least you'll have more data. Include watermark. That's if you want to have a watermark. I will probably make a whole tutorial on watermarks because it's a little complicated. More options include metadata, which is all, the location and date info and camera, info and stuff like that. And file naming original, which is basically it's going to save the file as the same name that you imported it as. Output sharpening, we talked about sharpening earlier. This is basically sharpening on output. That it'll apply none. You can also add some. I've never really used any of this. This doesn't look like the slider, it looks like something else. And I'm surprised by it because I've never used it. I might have opened it like once in the past or something. You do actually have to tap none. You can't just tap out of it, which is really weird. You have to pick one, basically. And I can't actually tap out of that. That's weird. ProPhoto RGB is the best color space. So like, the most amount, the widest range of colors. Explaining color spaces could probably be another whole video. Wow, there's a lot of tangent videos that I have to make now that I might or might not make depending on what happens. And then you click the check mark. Once you're done with your settings, it downloads the original if it's not already downloaded, because I cleared cache earlier, so I deleted this from the local storage. So it just downloaded the original, and now it's gonna export. Now it exported it, with the edits applied, and now I can save image and save to files and save to drive and all that stuff. If I click save image, it will save it to my photo albums. So I click save image. This photo was successfully shared. I'm not going to open my photos, but you get the idea. And now we can leave the editing tab, and we can now look at the rest of the stuff. So here's the shared with you menu. Here's the, online thing where people, can create tutorials, and I guess people can publish stuff. Again, I don't really use any of this. And here is daily inspiration. I don't know what this is. I've never used this. And these are all the different albums. All of those are pre-made albums, and the albums below are your own albums. For example, this album, which I'm probably going to blur for privacy reasons, and this is just, I added some photos to this album to share with my cousin. Like, this is the photos I wanted to give to them. And I think you can add photos to an album by just tapping and holding and selecting, and you can add to down there. And I think I showed the add to menu from somewhere else earlier as well. And yeah, that is, I think, my full Lightroom tutorial. There's a bunch of other little stuff as well as the other stuff that I didn't mention, probably because I never used it, or I just didn't want to mention it because it's relatively insignificant. And also the other stuff that I want to make other videos on because it would be a lot of explaining, and some stuff that I've never used or looked at like once or something, so I don't really know much about it. So yeah, that is the full tutorial, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye. Am I done with the retake? I'm done with the retake. Yay. And now is when it's going to transition into the original second part, which I don't need to retake since I have the screen recording footage for that, and the original footage, and the phone footage. So yeah, that's the end of the retake. Yay! Excuse me. And yeah, that is my Lightroom tutorial. Thank you. And yeah, that is my Lightroom tutorial. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.